Hey guys, it's Saturday, October 27th. I still have a lot of work to do around the house, but today I'm going to build some raised beds for my future garden. I went to Lowe's last weekend with a pickup truck and picked up some of their pressure-treated lumber. Now there are a lot of videos out there on the internet that show you how to build a raised bed. That is not going to be the purpose of this video. Instead, the purpose of this video is to discuss the materials I purchased and why I did it. There is a lot of information floating around out there, good and bad, about the use of pressure-treated lumber in your garden beds and the leaching of chemicals in the soil. Most of the information out there are wives' tales from previous generations of lumber when they used arsenic to pressure treat it. Arsenic in pretty much any quantity is toxic to human beings. They no longer use that. It is banned in the United States. What they use is copper. They use copper to pressure treat the lumber, and it is very important that you make sure that your lumber, if you choose to use pressure treated lumber, has these ground contact stickers on them. Here is a close-up of the ground contact label so you could clearly see what the label says. Now, I want to make it clear that it is true that if you use pressure-treated lumber, the copper will leach into your soil in some quantity. However, I also want to let you know that as a mostly organic gardener, I voluntarily spray my plants down with liquid copper fungicide in the spring and summer and early fall because it is a fantastic way of preventing diseases from taking hold. So I am voluntarily spraying my fruit and my leaves down with that. So I personally am not concerned with very small quantities of copper leaching into the soil and uptaking into the fruit when I'm voluntarily covering my fruits and vegetables in a much heavier solution on my own. If you are so organic that you don't use anything on your vegetables or fruits at all, more power to you, but I live in the humid southeast, right on the coast of southeastern North Carolina, and there's too much disease here, and I'm of the mind that anything I grow myself is infinitely better than what I can get at the grocery store, be it conventional or organic. So my personal view is that the negligible amount of copper leaching into my soil from using pressure-treated lumber is just a non-issue. That's my personal opinion. Yours may vary. If you choose to use a wood like cedar that is naturally rot resistant, it's going to cost you a lot more money. And it's also not going to last as long as ground contact rated pressure treated lumber. You will have to replace your beds more often if that's the way you want to go. That again is totally fine. I have no qualms with that. I'm just telling you my personal opinion. I'm trying to do this as cheaply as possible, and even using these materials, which were a compromise, it's still going to cost me about $40 per raised bed to make a 4-foot by 10-foot bed out of 2x8s. So let's talk about sizing of raised beds. The wood that you see in front of you are all 2x8s. The big ones on the left side are 10 feet long. The smaller ones that you see cut are 8 feet long that I had Lowe's cut in half. So my raised beds are going to be made out of 2x8s. They are going to be 10 feet long and they are going to be 4 feet wide. Now, you can determine the best sizing of your beds based on your own personal opinion and what works best for you, but I strongly recommend no matter what you do not make them wider than 4 feet. And the reason why is because a human being, on average, can only reach about 2 feet over comfortably. If you make them wider than 4 feet, you're going to have a very hard time reaching the center of the bed. You can make them narrower if you wish. You can make them 3 feet wide or 3.5 feet wide. But the reason why I'm not doing this is because I practice crop rotation, and my main crop that I grow are tomatoes, and they prefer to have 2 feet of width, as much width as possible. So I'm going for the maximum width. I would have liked to have made the beds 12 feet long instead of 10 feet long, but the 12-foot boards are much more expensive, and I don't have room. The extra 2 feet on all of the beds, it's just going to be too wide and I can't afford the space. So the largest that I can go is a 4 foot wide by 10 foot long bed. Now let's talk about depth. These are 2x8s, and despite the name, a 2x8 is actually 7.5 inches deep. So my raised beds are going to be 7.5 inches deep. Ideally, you would want your raised beds to be as deep as possible, and you would use 2x12s, but again, the cost and the weight difference between a 2x8 and a 2x12 is huge, and if you're setting them down just on top of a flat lawn or on top of native soil, your roots are basically going to have an infinite depth to grow to anyway, so it's not really going to matter. If you were to put these down on top of stone or concrete where there is no live ground beneath it, 12 inches isn't going to be deep enough anyway, unless you're going to grow things just like lettuce and things with shallow root systems. If you were putting raised beds on top of concrete or rock or some kind of solid impervious surface, you're going to want at least 18 inches of depth. But since these are going in my backyard with raw soil right underneath it, I'm cutting costs, and 7.5 inches of depth is going to be more than enough because the roots are going to be able to grow and reach below the surface. This right here is approximately where I'm going to put all of my raised beds and build my garden. As you can see, I'm going to set them right down on native soil with no grass. It's mostly sand, so it has pretty good drainage in it naturally. Some people you'll see when they put in their raised beds, they put some kind of screen or some kind of filter fabric as a weed barrier on the bottom. That is completely unnecessary. Once you put about 4 inches of soil on top of grass, the grass is going to die. And over time, that is actually going to decompose down into nice organic matter. So you're not going to get seeds growing up in your raised bed if you put more than 4 inches or so of soil on top of it. Even if you have a fully grassed-in backyard and you were to put your raised beds right on top of your lawn is going to break down because it's not going to get any kind of light, and it's going to stay moist under all that soil. And the natural soil biology, the worms, the bacteria, the nematodes, they're going to digest that grass and they're going to turn it into compost over time. Because I'm putting this down on solid, well-draining, decent land, I went with 2x8s as a measure to cut costs, because 2x10s and 2x12s are a lot more money, and they're a lot heavier, and they're a lot more difficult to work with. So if you're going to set your raised beds right down on top of a decent quality lawn or a decent quality piece of land that has pretty good drainage, the roots over time on your plants are going to penetrate that top 8 inches, and they're going to grow down into the native soils, and they're going to be just fine. Because we're building on top of earth, we basically have an infinite reach for your roots, so there's no need to spend extra money on 2x10s or 2x12s in most cases. So right here you can see my first raised bed that I'm starting. The first thing that you need to know, 2x4s, 2x6s, 2x8s, 2x10s, 2x12s, they're not actually 2 inches wide. They are 1 5/8 inches wide. I guess 1 5/8 by 4s don't sound very nice, so that's why they call them 2x4s and they just round up. I'm really not quite sure. But what you need to secure them, you need 3-inch exterior wood screws. You want to make sure that they have at least a 10-year warranty, because ground treated lumber lasts about 10 years. So you want to make sure the screws are rated to last at least as long as the lumber. The next thing you want to do, you want to drill a few pilot holes. So what I did was I drilled 3 pilot holes exactly 7/8 of an inch in from the end. That way it will contact the dead center of this piece of lumber. So all you want to do is you want to mark 2 points, 7/8 in, 7/8 in, draw a line connecting them, and then drill 3 holes, 1 in the center and 2 on each end. One thing I do like to do is I like to get the screws started in each of the boards before I flip the board 90 degrees and butt it up against the other. It's difficult to start straight when you begin on an angle, but if you start straight down with gravity, it's not so bad to flip it up and make your connection with the board then. I recommend going slowly when you drill in your screws. That way you can apply a firm pressure and not strip them, and not apply so much rotational speed that you will move the orientation of this board. You want to keep them as close to 90 degrees as possible. So here are my first 4 garden beds. These were the 4 I could make because this is all the pre-cut wood I could get from Lowe's. I'm going to have to actually buy a saw to cut the other 8-foot pieces of 2x8s. That way I can build my other 4 beds, but I'm starting off with 8 beds total for this year. One thing you want to be very aware of when you do this is spacing in between garden beds. I made sure to have 24-inch spacing between each raised bed. And the reason why is because you have to make sure that you can get your lawnmower in between each bed if you're going to have grass in between them. The last thing you want to do is make the spacing so tight that you can't get a lawnmower in there and actually trim the grass, and you have to trim it by hand or with a weed whacker or something crazy like that. It's really tempting to put them closer together, but you definitely want to make sure that you can fit in between them comfortably, and you want to make sure that you can get your lawnmower in there for maintenance. If you have a riding mower, you may need to extend the width of the garden beds in order to fit your riding mower, or else you'll wind up having to push mow that by hand. So make sure you take a tape measure and you measure the total width of your lawnmower, and you add a few inches to that for clearance on each side before you go ahead and you make permanent spacing. Now, these beds aren't necessarily where they're going to stay. I want them to dry out because they're still soaking, sopping wet from the recent pressure treating process. When you drill through them, all kinds of ooze comes out, so they definitely need to dry out. So I want to leave them here. I have no plans to grow anything over the winter due to my situation, but I'm going to make sure that these things are ready to go for the new year. If you found the information in this video helpful, please subscribe to the channel for future updates. I really appreciate you all watching. Have a good day, and we'll see you next time.